Hey friends, welcome to the Canyon Pathways podcast, where we invite you to live like a son and lead like a father. Canyon Pathways is a global community of men on a journey from the striving of servanthood to the freedom of sonship as we traverse the canyon that is midlife leadership. My name is Noel Bouché. I'm the founder and part of the leadership team for this venture, and I'll be your guide throughout this podcast as we explore and discover what it means to live like a son so we can lead like a compassionate father. All right, let's get into it. Really excited about this episode. Have a great conversation in our Sonship story segment with my friend Peter Glynn. And he's an important member of the Canyon Pathways community, incredible guy, and eager for you to be a part of that conversation. But first, let's start with our featured field note. And this episode, we are looking at expectations. This is an interesting exploration for me. It's what every field note is. It's taking a theme and specifically one word that is a word not only relevant to us, but maybe one that we use frequently or that is a theme in our lives. But when we really dig into it and explore and unpack what it means and what the potential meaning is for us, things begin to emerge. And that's how it went for me with this field note on expectations. You know, we often talk about expectations. We, in midlife leadership, we're doing a lot of planning. We're continually planning, and both directly in our leadership roles, also for contingencies. We plan, and when we plan, we have expectations. But we begin to learn that our expectations are not always met. They're not always realized, and it's a dangerous place when we move into a rather fixed position of having an expectation, because it usually will be altered by reality and by first contact with reality and opposition and disappointments, and that can put us on our heels or worse. It can flat out flatten us, knock us down. So expectations and understanding what they are, what they do, how they get formed is important to us as sons. You know, think about this in the context of sonship. The two sons in Luke 15 both had pretty fixed expectations. The younger son in the far country said, I'm going home. This is crazy. I've blown it. And I'm just going to preempt all the vitriol and rejection that I'm going to face just by saying, hey, look, I blew it. I'm not worthy of being a son. Just make me a servant, make me a hired hand, make me like an employee. And that's because he had an expectation that he would be received, would be forgiven, wouldn't experience grace. And he created a narrative in his head. And the older sibling had another narrative in his head that he hadn't yet earned, that he wasn't yet worthy of the fatted calf, that he had to keep grinding. And as he kept grinding, kept getting more and more exhausted, holding it all together, and then was angry and inflexible and could not respond because his expectations were blown to shreds. He thought he'd get everything. You know, the younger son had gone, he blew it, wasted it. He was the responsible one. He would be the one who'd get the fatted calf. He would be the one who would first be lavished love on. When that didn't happen the way he expected, he wasn't down with it. And the father to both of them came out and said, look, let go of your expectations and just be expectant of what I'm going to do, which may not be what you can expect on the front end. But I'm going to surprise you. That's what a good father does. He's always surprising with his grace, with his provision, with his love, with his purposes, with his revelation. So let's get into it. Here's a field note on expectations, and I'll catch you on the backside as we dig into what we discovered at this field note. Recently, I was talking with a friend who's going through a lot of transition, and the conversation took an interesting turn as we discussed how the weekend had gone. He said, somewhat lightheartedly, that things went sideways when a scheduled delivery didn't happen, preventing him from working on a project he had carved out all of Saturday to complete. My expectations for the day were dashed, he told me, to which he responded with a self-described pouting and wasting away in front of a video game console. It led to an enlightening exploration of deeper, more significant unfulfilled expectations than a delayed widget. And we all have them, and we suffer because of them. A quick search of unmet expectations turns up the usual greater than 100 million results in 0.57 seconds, with links containing words like pain, disappointment, danger, victim, serial killer of relationships, as well as what seems to be an entire subgenre of romance novels. Expectations of the unmet sort seem to be closely associated with a whole host of negative outcomes. Indeed, they are perhaps the cause. As others have said, expectation is the root of all heartache. But why? Is not expectation simply a necessary aspect of planning and future orientation? Let's dig into the word itself. Our English word expectation is derived from a Latin root, which means anticipation or an awaiting. So far, not so awful. Anticipation seems largely good, and an awaiting has an almost theological ring to it. Is that not the essence of hope? The noun form, however, has its origin in the verb to expect. Ex meaning thoroughly, spect meaning to look, such as in our words inspect and spectacle, among others. Again, nothing here that screams danger, serial killer of relationships and joy. So why all the bad press? I'm discovering the answer lies in form, not substance. In other words, in the journey from verb to adjective to noun might lie the difference between hope and despair. While much of life is anticipatory, when we form an expectation, we now possess a noun, a thing, an intangible artifact we have fashioned by gazing into the fantasy of the future, whether tomorrow or 10 years from now. It's an object we have fabricated in isolation, one that will be used one way or another, either to display, to control, to wield, to obsess over, or to be dashed to pieces. It's a possession, and we humans tend to hoard and guard closely our possessions and be let down by them. Whether they are of our spouse, our children, parents, our employees, our friends, our God, our expectations, our possessed, imagined, scripted, and tightly controlled behaviors and performances of any other living being will not emerge into the concreteness of reality as we planned, even if we die 1,000 deaths desperately trying to make it so. Yet there is a pathway forward. Because we are human beings, not human doings, as the saying goes, to be expectant is indeed a fundamental aspect of being human. But importantly, to experience expectancy is a matter of being, not having, one of posture, not possession. To be expectant, rather than to have expectations, is to act as a steward of experiences, not an owner of outcomes. To be one who is present and responds to what is, not one stuck in what is wished for but is not. It is to live in the flexibility of sonship, not the rigidity of servitude. To lead in the redemptive responsiveness of a good father, not the irascible inflexibility of a tyrant. It is to face unforeseen twists with eyes looking with hope to the immortal one, and to respond to wrong steps and missteps with restoration. It's to walk in what is true, what is, and to love and empower those around us as they actually are, not as we wish them to be. To accept ourselves as we are, not as we wish or pretend to be. And in so doing, to find the lightness of joy that our heavy collection of engineered expectations has never allowed us to experience, regardless of whether or not the widget arrives. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Matthew 24:44. All right, expectations versus expectancy. Having expectations versus being expectant. I really loved writing that field note, and primarily because of the discovery that is kind of where the action is. It's not so much in this case what an expectation means or what it is, but rather how we're structuring this thing. In this case, it's grammatical, not definitional. Instead of really understanding the word expectation, it's understanding that, hey, the real thing here is to be expectant. to have this posture of being versus having the right expectations, not having the wrong expectations. That was game changing for me. Expectations just keeps coming up, conversations, and in this stage of life, because in midlife, two things are going on in midlife leadership. First of all, you're in midlife, so there are some things that have not turned out the way you thought they were going to. That is going to be true, and I think it's one way we're not prepared for midlife, for our 30s, 40s, and 50s. It's a way we're not preparing ourselves for midlife. Is, hey, things are not going to be exactly as you planned. There's the old saying that a plan never survives first contact with the enemy, or never survives first contact with reality. And the same is true in our life. And so we're going to have expectations that are unmet. How are we going to deal with that? And one way to respond to that is to make this move from carrying around expectations, from just, forming expectations every day, every year, every decade about what our marriage should look like, what our career should look like, what we should have, where we should be, how our kids' lives should look. Just setting all that aside and just saying, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to just be expectant. And I think it really gets to the heart of sonship, because sonship's an identity. It's a posture. It's a posture of resting, receiving, and inheriting, versus someone who's a servant, a hired hand, essentially an employee who earns. Hey, I did X, I get Y. That's what the deal is. That's what I'm here for. A son says, I don't know what's going to happen. Dad, what are we doing today? What's gonna come about? What do you got planned? I can't wait to see it. And it's this responsiveness that creates not just a flexibility and a resilience, but also a joy and just a profound gratitude moment to moment, even when we walk through the difficulties, even when we walk through the challenges of life, of leadership, even when we walk through the demanding periods. There's still this expectancy that, hey, something's happening here. Let me get down into this. What's going on? What's the Father doing? What's happening in my life? What's the purpose in this? I might not see it for a long time, but I know something is going on here, both on the mountaintop and down in the darkest part of the valley or the canyon. Something's happening, and let me just be expectant. Back in my days long ago as an athlete, that was the thing. You always had to have balance. No matter what sport you were playing, you got to be balanced. And, you can go into every match, every game, you got a game plan, but a game plan's only going to last for so long, maybe one drive, After that, it's the old thing of plans bumping up against reality. Just nothing's going to, you're going to have to audible. You're going to have to adjust the game plan. You have to make some halftime adjustments to stay in a posture that's balanced, that's able to move, that's able to respond to the moment, not what we thought was going to happen. No one wants to be down by 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. But those are some of the greatest games in the history of the game. Those are the ones we remember, the great comeback. And you don't plan for those. You simply don't plan to be down by a couple scores when the game's on the line. But if you're resilient, if you're responsive, if you're expectant that, hey, we can pull this out. Hey, something's happening. Something's going to break our way. We can take advantage of it. It's the same thing in our case as living like a son, being expectant that the Father's doing something. So that was a great, really discovery for me, and it's really transformed my mind and my heart as I've reflected on it. That's the thing. Just let go of expectations. Stop carrying around this weight of these things, these possessions, these things that I think I deserve or I'm owed. Set it down. Set that heavy load down, and now just be expectant. Just be expectant. Be ready. Trust. Believe He's a good Father. Believe there's an inheritance. Believe that if I come back from the far country, there'll be a robe and a ring and sandals. Believe that if I come in from the fields, from striving and earning and grinding away, if I come in, that there will be celebration, that there'll be a fatted calf that I've been trying to earn, but maybe it's already prepared if I'm just expectant and ready for the invitation back to the table. So usually what we're going to do is have one insight on this and one inquiry. So, here's the insight. Posture is more important than possessions. Posture in life, in my life, is more important than possessions. Obviously, we kind of invert that, flip it. The world flips that for us. It's about how many toys you got, how many zeros you got. You got the house in the right zip code. You got the Instagrammable family. You got the right CV. That's just usually what we do. Focus on possessions, whether they're tangible or the intangible possessions. And some of us are weighed down by intangible possessions, not just ones that we deem positive, but also the negative ones. Guilt, shame, fear, regrets. Those are all things, they're objects, they're possessions, but posture is more important. What posture am I taking? Am I waking up today like a servant or a hired hand who's got to go out there and prove and earn? Or am I waking up today with a posture of sonship, of resting in my heart, receiving the goodness, the grace, the opportunity, the love, the compassion, the courage, the fullness that's on offer to me as an heir, as a son? That's the choice we make every day. Here's the inquiry. Are you expectant, or are you carrying around expectations? Are we expectant, or are we just carrying around this sack of objects? Some of us are into rucking right now. It's good to go out and ruck. It's good to throw in a weighted vest. It's good. Then there's time to take it off. And some of us are walking around with a weighted vest on in our lives of unmet expectations, disappointed expectations, unrealized expectations. And here's the good news. We can take that weighted vest off. We can take that weight off the bat and walk in a posture of expectancy. All right, time to move into our conversation segment. And we call this Sonship Stories. Conversations with brothers around the world in the Canyon Pathways community. And I'm eager to share with you some of the convo I had with my friend Peter Glynn. Peter's a remarkable person for many reasons, not least because of how his brilliantly analytical mind interacts with his artistic, compassionate heart. He's been a blessing in my life, and I'm eager to share some of the things that he shared with me. When Peter speaks, jewels kind of just drop from his lips, and we tried to catch a few of them here in this conversation. Peter's based in Houston. After getting his MBA, he worked for years in the oil and gas industry for super majors as well as startups, and also had a stint at McKinsey. And after we met in 2019, he quickly became a close friend, and really he's at the center of the Canyon Pathways story and how we formed up and how this community became real. So in the intervening years, the last 5 years, we've been around the world together, inviting men globally in midlife leadership into the rest and freedom of sonship. And I started off our conversation by asking him, how would you describe your journey into sonship in one word?
Man, it's hard to condense something down into one word, but I would just say discovery, man, because when we kind of got this thing rolling, and I told you this before, I said it's so simple in a lot of ways what we're doing, and yet it's profound, right? Because it touches I think a really unmet need, in the life of guys, and we now know all over the world, it's part of the God's reality. And so that's true for me too, right? Because we all have our kind of lens through which we see these things, our family experiences, and mine has quite a bit of, drama and trauma in it. And so it's been just a nice resonant, affirmation, again, of my identity, and I've lived long enough to have looked at, gone through many different temptations to place that identity in other places, whether it's job or whatever, expectations about, your progress through life or even your spiritual development. But just kind of doing this exploration, with the guys in the Canyon community has helped me really understand, I put kind of an exclamation point, right, on the fact that our identity is we're sons of the living God. We've been born anew into his kingdom. We're part of his family. And, a lot of times that can just sound like sort of a spiritual thing or religious words, but, in fact, it is a reality. And it's been great walking, through our community and discovering that that is in fact a reality. And it's like maybe one of the most substantial foundation. It is the most substantial foundation that we can base our identity on. And particular because our world is so torn up today with people and identity issues. And, I always like to say, like, people that are obsessed with identity are people who don't know who they are, so there's a kind of like, sort of like really nice, easy settling into, this is who I am, this is who we are. And all the strength of life, of God's promises come out of that identity. So that's been great, and it's still unfolding. So for me, it started with meeting you, right? Basically, Noel. Of course, it's become now one of my myriads of stories, interesting stories, because it was so unusual how that happened. But really, it's tied to relationship. It's tied to you and Luke and those initial guys in Spearfish Canyon. And at first, and I know I mentioned this to you, that because I didn't come, when I first met you, it was about a different matter, right? To talk about some of the other work that you were doing. And through our conversation, kind of this started to resonate. And when that happened, I was really happy for you, and I thought, this is great. God has spoken to Noel and kind of put a fire under him to do this. It's like fulfilling part of his calling and who he is. And I thought kind of at first, I was content to be an observer, and I was happy about that. But as I began to participate, it became clear to me that kind of I had a role in this as well, and that my participation and involvement was a calling for me too. So that's continued to develop. So for me, Canyon Pathways is, again, less something I kind of discovered from outside, that's kind of emerged from within my walk in life and my group of relationships with these guys. And that's pretty satisfying to me. And for me, that's kind of this right here, right? Like, in some ways, expect the unexpected, and I've always been kind of a guy who, like, yes oriented, that I tend to say yes to things. It's kind of an adventuresome nature. And sometimes saying yes has got me into a lot of trouble, but on balance, I find it's great to say yes, especially, and to be prepared, right? To be receptive to things coming up that kind of weren't in your control space, that weren't on your map. And some of the most exciting things in life have always come to me that way. And so, I found that was an unexpected thing that happened that's now generated a lot of other anticipation, expectation, hope, whatever that is really interesting. Yeah, like Forrest Gump, like life's a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to find until you pop the lid and put one in your mouth, and that's kind of what we've been doing. And I love that. That's exciting to me, because we get, especially like this day and age, when like things here in the United States are chaotic, but you never know what's going to come up. And I think we have to have, we sometimes get in this control situation where we're just putting life in a box, and it's like, we have these expectations. It needs to be this way. I want it to go that way. And some of the most beautiful things God does are the things that come from outside the box, that we're not expecting, but that we have to be receptive to, ready to say yes to. And I think a lot of what we're doing is kind of on that theme, inviting guys in from all over the world, and the invitation begs the response, right? To say yes. And that's so how God is in my life. It's like, he is yes, he is amen. There's all kinds of good things that he wants to do if he can kind of lull us out of this kind of control space where we're willing to, prayerfully and thoughtfully say yes to things that we didn't expect.
Beautiful. Let's jump right to this. What was your response when you first received your Canyon word, and what do you think about this thing we do called Canyon words?
My first response was like, you got to know me, man. I was like, oh man, like, what is that? Like, Canyon, what a word. Like, it's because I'm like, yeah, whatever. Okay, what kind of gimmick is this now, But in the end, again, you say yes to things through faith. And I find that these words that we give, I think a lot of people get surprised because there is no thing. It's just a nucleation point, right? It's a nucleation point to reflect, right? And just think. It's not prescriptive. It's not prophetic. It's not, I remember talking to another brother, and he was going like, you told me this was, I was freaking out, like, what am I not? I'm not delivering in a certain way. And then he discovered there's another whole aspect to that word that completely resonated. So I think it's kind of a neat little thing that just gets us thinking and can provide a little nucleation point, right, for the spirit to tell us, look, what you just received may seem trivial, right? It's not prophetic, but by faith, if you just examine that, because it was given in thoughtfulness by somebody else, right?
It was a gift.
It was a gift. It was a gift. It was done prayerfully. It's almost inconsequential. But if you think about it a little bit, you'll find God will have something to say to you through it, right? And then maybe that's for today, maybe it's for a week, maybe it'll stick for a long time. But I kind of see it as something that initiates that process, right? Of reflecting, like, how do I think about this in terms of community? How do I think about it in terms of myself, my life, my assumptions and presumptions? And I think that's a nice little exercise. And we've seen, through the guys that have come through, we've had a lot of stories like that. Like at first, it's like, why did you do that? I didn't want that. That's not my whatever. And then you stop and rest with it a little bit, and you find there's unexpected, right? Little gifts that can come out of that exercise. So I think it's kind of a nice tradition that we have. And I do wonder, it's like, what is the duration of the word? Like my word was land, and there's a lot of interesting things. I've actually bought some land, and that's cool. I've engaged with the lands, right? And the brothers over there, and I have been for decades. So that's pretty cool. And also like landing, like settling, I've gone through a lot of business stuff, a lot of stuff on the journey in the last few years. It felt like I've kind of landed a little bit, right? Touch and go, ready to take off again. So
plus you're a geologist.
Answer, but it's like, it's an attempt. Yeah. Plus a geologist. So
how would you describe where you are today in your sonship journey?
Today, on the road, man, like walking the road. And again, like I said, I've taken these things kind of from my perspective, kind of as part of an invitation, a walk of faith, a journey with other brothers, right, in relationship. And to me, like, sonship without brotherhood is kind of emasculated, right? It's only partly there. Sonship implies brotherhood, right? So I think there's a big aspect about sonship is walking with brothers, and understanding their journey, and when we kind of get this identity framework in place that really are, because when the unexamined conscious has all kinds of presumptions and assumptions in it that have been untested, and so when we say words like this, for the average person, there's going to be already pre-existing filter, right, through which those go. But I think it's great to be able to kind of, through walking with guys, get out of that a little bit and start again to see what this means in terms of my identity. Do I say I'm a believer? I say I believe this. I say I'm in relation. I truly maybe mean it, but it has to come to life, right, by walking it out day by day in relationship, in the things you do. And I find that to be a really great exploration, right? So it's a daily exploration. And it also doesn't mean for me, there's a lot of stuff, because my world has narrowed actually dramatically in the last, several years. And I had talked about that with you offline. I said, there was a time in my life, I just sold this company. I was deeply involved in the arts. I mean, I probably had like 250 people on my immediate associates kind of list. And I was so thin, I prayed to God and I said, Lord, prune the tree. There's just too much growth here. We need to focus, prune it. I needed to focus. I'm spread too thin. And as I told you, it turned into the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, So basically, God has really pruned that stuff down to a small number of things. But I like that, because I think another problem we have today is if we can't focus, if we're spread too thin, we miss out on a lot of stuff, a lot of depth.
Beautiful. The question is, what does it mean to you to live like a son and lead like a father?
Yeah. Well, to live like a son, I guess for me is rest, right? Because just again, going through life, right? We all start off as sons, in a human sense, and we all start off in a relationship to human fathers, right? And I had my particular lot in life. There was a lot of damage around that relationship, kind of broken home upbringing, and lots of drama, sibling things as well too. So for me, like being a son was always striving, right? I mean, striving to achieve or striving to get free, right? In a lot of ways, right? And so kind of, again, as a believer, I know intellectually, like I'm a son of God, but having gotten beaten myself on the rock of all those experiences for so many years, kind of I've begun to discover that I can rest, that I'm loved, I know who I am. God loves me. He delights in me as his son, right? He's not there, brooding, waiting for you to achieve more, do more, be better, fail less. He simply delights in who you are, right? In relationship to him. And that has really started to blossom, and flourish a bit more in my life. And of course, when that starts to take hold in a meaningful and real way, to where you go, God delights in everything, including walking through the difficult moments. Like he's there for it. Reorients the thinking, and also begins to have a effect on how I see my relationship with my brothers and other people, right? Because they have the same issues or many other issues too. We have this like marred image, coming into a broken world, and God is in the process of restoring and repairing all those things. So it's given me a little bit more understanding, and connection and empathy for the guys I'm walking with. And I think when people start to get that as a group, it creates transparency, right? I mean, to open up yourself is a good thing, but you can't do it in a relationship. It takes two to tango, right? And so to see that happening on bilaterally, with other guys is great. And that's kind of what my sonship journey has been these last couple of years with Canyon Pathways, and I expect it to continue.
To lead like a father means what?
To basically rest again, but rest in the accomplishments God has wrought, So, and again, I think age has something to do with it. I'm 63, so I've lived a little bit more of life. It just means more experience, just more mileage on the odometer, gone through the road. So I've had longer time to work through some of that stuff. And as I do, I recognize that, if I've survived it and I've been conscious about it, I'm coming out with lessons, right? I'm coming out with gifts that have been forged, right, through that experience. And I think for me, leading like a father is being able to share that with others along the journey who may be further behind. Some of them are further ahead, and I have to be receptive to that as well. But it feels like I've got a basket of treasures, right, so to speak, that I can now share in a very rewarding, kind of an effective way with people who are like-minded and a willingness to receive. So I think it's a good dynamic, right? It's a flow back and forth. And I think that's how it should be. And again, we miss that today, I think, in our society a lot, where oftentimes, elder people have gone down the road a little bit further, seem to get more marginalized in our society rather than as being recognized as a trove of treasures, right? That can part that wealth to those that are following along the path. And again, that's a really healthy, I think, dynamic of the kingdom, right? That we get to model and live out and play with and explore in this group of brothers now that's expanding all over the world.
Great stuff with Peter, and important insights on living like a son. It means letting go of expectations and instead living expectantly about what the Father is going to do in our lives. Friends, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Check out the show notes for links, as well as a PDF with discussion questions if you'd like to use this for personal reflection or in group meetings. Make sure you subscribe, catch all the episodes as they drop, as we develop a language of sonship through this podcast and hear stories from men in midlife around the globe. Big thanks to the team at Maroon Harpoon for producing this episode. A lot of gratitude to all of our donors who make the Canyon Pathways community possible. And as always, thanks for being a part of the Canyon Pathways community as we together live like sons and lead like fathers.